Welcome to this presentation by Gloria Sabona, a member of the BMA's Equality and Diversity Committee. The presentation looks at the cultural dimensions of communication and aims to improve the way medical professionals think about communication in order to improve their interactions with their patients, regardless of their own cultural background.
Thinking inside a box is a model which aims to explain simply how the complex field of intercultural communication is at the core of all the relationships we have within the healthcare setting in the UK, no matter what our background might be. This is because we are all boxed in, more or less, by our cultures in a way which shapes our beliefs, our values and our behaviours. Every patient that we serve in the UK today has their own particular culture or socio-cultural system, with nearly 1 in 10 of the UK population identifying themselves as being from an ethnic minority because they differ in ways such as language or in physical features such as race. In larger cities like London, for instance, up to 40% of the population are from an ethnic minority, with over 250 languages spoken. Our patients are boxed in by their cultures also because of a linguistic culture determined by the socioeconomics of class, education and geography. This can determine how fluent they are in the English language, their vocabulary, slang and dialect, and urban or rural residents. So it's not uncommon in the UK to find towns that are only 20 miles apart having very different dialects spoken. Such sociocultural diversity is becoming increasingly important in light of the strong relationship between an individual's ethnic and social culture and their health status and mortality. For example, their health-seeking behaviours may be affected. So some patients may delay seeking care due to perceived cultural insensitivity or concern that they will receive a lower quality of care, or even the perception that they've been treated unfairly because of their social-cultural background. Then there's also the fact that there's evidence of very marked differences in the healthcare outcomes of different socioeconomic groups and ethnic groups. These disparities often present as what are termed as inequalities in quality. In other words, even if certain groups use the service, they may still receive less care and poorer quality care than their middle class and more educated compatriots. Closing the health gap, as it were, for people in these groups is now a very important priority, and it's been recognised in reports such as the recent Marmot report, Fair Society, Healthy Lives. The report describes a situation in which disparities in health and healthcare are increasing among different social classes. Furthermore, after the amendment of the Race Relations Act in 2000, there's now a statutory duty upon the NHS and other UK public service agencies to not only avoid discrimination, but actually to actively promote and report on equality in service delivery. So there's now a push for us as health providers to do more to tackle such disparities and to understand how social and cultural influences, practices and needs presented by patients and their communities can actually affect their health beliefs and behaviours, and hence their access to equitable healthcare services. But what we often see as culture is the outward or the visible appearances of the patient's box. We only hear what our patients say in the form of language and accent, or see how they behave in the form of the clothing they wear, or the way that they greet us, or even how ill they look. But these ways of doing, as it were, only make up 1/10 of what has been referred to as the tip of the iceberg model of culture. In this model, culture is compared to an iceberg and has both visible on the surface and invisible below the surface parts. What you actually see on the outside of that box is not a true reflection of what makes that patient tick. Our generic communication skills do not allow us to appreciate what's actually hidden on the inside of that box, plastered on it like wallpaper, because inside that box there is a background of attitudes, beliefs and values that drives how our patients behave on the outside, and therefore how they will ultimately communicate with us. So culture is actually like dropping an Alka-Seltzer into a glass. You don't see it, but you know that somehow it does something. You see a patient in front of you in their box, and you know there's something going on behind, but you don't really know how to sort of get to those feelings behind. So accessing the inside of that box is going to take more than just a focus on the outside things such as language, as research shows that simply talking with a patient will not automatically ensure the successful transfer of meaning and feeling. One very unique UK study looked at how health professionals experience and perceive their work with patients from diverse ethnic communities, and showed that though they tried to offer appropriate care, health professionals often wrestled with considerable uncertainty and apprehension in responding to the needs of patients of ethnicities different from their own. They emphasize their perceived ignorance about cultural difference and were anxious about being culturally inappropriate, causing offence, or appearing discriminatory or racist. Professionals' ability to think and act flexibly or creatively actually faltered, creating a disabling inertia in their practice. The consequences of such uncertainty, hesitancy, and inertia in one's practice can make providing appropriate care difficult and actually contribute to ethnic disparities or socio-cultural disparities in healthcare. It can cause damage to relationships upon which the success of communication rests. One example was a black mother being told by a midwife that her baby was a cheeky monkey. The mother took offence because she didn't understand the word cheeky or cheeky monkey together, but she took the word monkey to be a slur on her child. This lack of communication may mean that patients' perspectives about their illnesses and even their expectations may remain unexplored and critical issues unaddressed. This gap, therefore, may leave care to be based upon inadequate information and a professional's cultural assumptions and generalizations. And this may in itself compound unhelpful stereotypes and attitudes that some healthcare professionals may hold. So we all need to be thinking that as we are all boxed in by culture, we all actually need cultural understanding. It's desirable for all of us to understand it. The basic skills of intercultural communication are fundamentally a set of knowledge and skills and attitudes in communication, which healthcare professionals need to be trained in order to better respond to patient diversity. Despite a growing body of health and educational policies that actually prioritize cultural competency in healthcare provision, there is a great deal of uncertainty about what constitutes diversity teaching. Implementation of culturally competent training in the UK is sparse and generally inadequate, and there's very little postgraduate training. Most training actually occurs within medical schools, although this differs in its content, emphasis and duration. Medical schools traditionally follow a knowledge-based approach, the focus being on the outside of boxes with lists of preferred words, images or approaches for treating minority groups, portraying each group as having particular values, beliefs and behaviours based on their culture. This is a very oversimplified practice, and while it can provide a useful shortcut to understanding patients, it fails to acknowledge diversity within groups and can potentially reinforce stereotypical behaviour. In addition, and most importantly, the curricula frequently overlook the importance of social factors in the cross-cultural encounter. Such cross-cultural curricula have been developed to address these issues, but are not widely used in medical education in the UK, and when they are, they often differ in their content, emphasis and duration. The philosophy of communication is that it should be based on improving the quality of thinking, recognizing the importance of cultural issues and exploring them where necessary with patients in order to understand the reasoning behind their actions or thought process or understand where they're coming from. It's about going beyond the stereotypes on the outside of the box and making an effort to understand the depth of the underlying issues that influence the factors presenting on the surface. This means developing skills that are generalizable across patients and cultures and include the ability to elicit an individual's perceptions of health and illness, as well as his or her explanatory model and preferences for treatment. Some authors have come up with a way to do this, such as Kleiman's 8 questions, which is a way of probing patients to find out what underlies the root of their problems. Another model is the Berlin and Fowkes LEARN guideline, which provides a framework for interaction between doctor and patient. It suggests that doctors listen to the patient's perception of their problem, then explain their own opinion. Then there has to be an acknowledgement and discussion of the differences and similarities between the patient's perception and what the doctor believes to be the issue. Then there's a recommendation of treatment, integrating it with the patient's opinion. And then finally, there's a negotiation or an agreement which covers medical, ethical and legal acceptability, but more importantly, covers what the patient expects of the clinical encounter. Thinking inside the box, however, goes one step further as it recognises the importance of the health professional's own culture. And it requires the health professional to reflect on their own cultural identities as an individual and as a health professional, and how these influence their personal perspectives on illness and health, and to look at their biases and challenge their assumptions, confront, importantly, the effects of power and privilege, and develop a far greater capacity for compassion and respect. This can be thought of as the learnt model. Thinking inside the box is about communicating from the inside out. It's a model around working with and becoming comfortable around any kind of difference rather than around checklists. It combines the tenets of patient-centred care with an understanding of the social and cultural influences, beliefs, practices and needs presented by patients and their communities that can affect the quality of medical services and treatment that they receive.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation. Further information on communication skills, health inequalities, or what the BMA can do for you, please look at our website at www.bma.org.uk.